I went to Barnes & Noble, my local Barnes & Noble in Alderwood, which I love. I love those folks. And I go there regularly. And I saw that they had a Barnes & Noble reading challenge. And so a book a week is on their challenge. And I'm going to try to do that. And I would love for you to join me for you to try to find some books to read every week. And you may be late, so just jump in on week 2. That's fine. But the first week was a book with a rabbit on the cover. And I didn't really understand why. But I was like, okay, whatever. Come to find out, it's the year of the rabbit. So I have always wanted to read, and I've been putting it off for as long as I've known it existed, but I wanted to read it. I've wanted to read Watership Down, which there, boom, rabbit on the cover. I'm still continuing with the Barnes & Noble 2023 Reading Challenge, as well as personal reading that I want to do throughout the year. And so the first book that I finished was an audiobook, and it was How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. And if you like stories told from multiple points of view with a lot of different characters over a long period of time, this book is excellent. I really enjoyed this book, and I would recommend. It went places I didn't expect it would go, and so going into it kind of blind and just reading, knowing that it's about a plague. I know that might be some things that people maybe don't want to read about after 2020 and COVID and the ongoing. Hey everyone, this week, as I'm continuing on with my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, my book that I was supposed to read was about a friend group. And this week, I finished Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. And if you like video games and maybe a picture of what it looks like for video game developers and friends to work together and to wrestle with grief and loss and success and spanning over decades together, getting to know these people, then you might really enjoy this book. I liked it, and I think it would be a fun read. I've seen it everywhere, and I'm glad I finally got to read it this past week. So yeah, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. Hey everyone, keeping up with my Barnes & Noble reading challenge for 2023. This week's theme was a story revolving around a murder. And so I picked up the first installment in the George Smiley universe by John le Carré, and it is called Call for the Dead, and it revolves around what appears to be a mysterious suicide of a former agent for British intelligence services. And we are introduced to George Smiley and his universe. And it's a well-paced, pretty quick read. And if you like spycraft and the British intelligence services kind of stuff, if you liked the movie Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, check it out. I recommend this book. Stay tuned. Hey everyone, keeping with my Barnes & Noble weekly challenge to read a book based on their list, and this week's challenge was a YA book of the month selection, and I don't read a lot of YA, so I went through to look in the past to see what they had selected, and so I chose Scythe by Neil Shusterman, and this is a book set in the future where they have cured mortality, but the problem is they need to make sure the population doesn't get out of control, and so there is an organization called the Scythedom that are actually appointed to keep the population under control. And so this book follows 2 apprentices and their teachers and how to do the work of being in the Scythedom. And it was a good book, very engaging, great characters. It is dark. I mean, there's violence. There are problems. And so I would recommend it. It was a good read. But yeah, check it out. Hi everyone, keeping up with my Barnes & Noble 2023 reading challenge. This week's book was a graphic novel, and I chose Crisis on Infinite Earths. And this book is a classic in DC Comics, as they were trying to bring all of the continuity from all of their different comics down to one, to focus it, to get back to a controllable universe for the creators. So this is a book with some great art, A lot of words. It is definitely an 80s comic, but the work of Marv Wolfman and George Perez, amazing classic works. So yeah, Crisis on Infinite Earths. If you are looking for a way to get an understanding of DC Comics, this may not be the best book, but it is a fun read. Thanks. Hey everyone, this week for my Barnes Noble Reading Challenge, the theme was a book about a shipwreck. And I was like, I don't know what to read, a book about a shipwreck. I don't want to read Titanic. Instead, I read Dead Wake by Eric Larson. And I checked this out from the library and I read it in paper and I listened to the audiobook. The audiobook was excellent. If you like the early 20th century history, if you like World War I history, if you're interested in political intrigue and maritime history, then Dead Wake has all of that in it. And I really enjoyed this book. This is the first I've ever read from Eric Larson as well. And this was a fantastic read. And I look forward to looking up more of his books in the future. So yeah, Dead Wake, Eric Larson, check it out. Hey everyone, I have another update for my Barnes & Noble Reading Challenge. And this week's challenge was to read the first in a series. And so I thought I'll double up on another project of reading all the Hugo winners. And the first in a series that's remaining is by David Brin. It is called Sundiver. It is the first in the Uplift saga. And in this story, Hey everyone, this week's Barnes & Noble Reading Challenge is a book with a non-human protagonist, and so I went to my TBR because I remembered Ancillary Justice was about an AI for a warship that was in a human clone body situation, and I really enjoyed that book, and it's the first in a trilogy, so I picked up Ancillary Sword, and so here Captain Breck is now managing a captain, but she also is dealing with themes of imperialism, colonialism, and how to learn and honor and respect different cultures. And as I was reading this, I was struck by the simple fact that there are no male characters. I'd never noticed that in the first one. And I was like, that was super interesting choice. So Ancillary Sword, check it out. Hey everyone, keeping up with my Barnes & Noble Reading Challenge. This week's book was a book with pirates. And I also have a desire to read more classics. So I picked up the Penguin's classic version of Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. And this is a book written for young boys. And I loved it. It was super fun. I was expected to be kind of bored because it's, an old book, but I really enjoyed it, and I think you might too. And it jumps in right away, gets really exciting, and so yeah, Treasure Island, check it out. This week's Barnes & Noble Challenge was to select a book club pick from Barnes & Noble, and so I looked over the last several months to find something that would be interesting to me, and I loved Station 11, and so I picked up Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. If you like time travel, if you like questions like, are we living in a simulation? If you like a good, fun mystery, then this is a great book. And does Emily try to get into all the technical stuff about time travel? No, but she makes you have fun while you're doing a time travel journey, and it's a great book. I loved it. So highly recommend Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. Check it out. This week for my Barnes & Noble book reading challenge, the theme was a book by an Indigenous author. And so I read, and I actually, from the audiobook from the library, read Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse. And this is a high fantasy where the mythology comes not from European traditions, like so much of our fantasy that we're accustomed to, but from indigenous cultures. And it was a very interesting read. Not my favorite book that I've read so far this year. And this is the second in a series, and I preferred the first one. But Rebecca Roanhorse is a great writer. Storm of Locusts was a great book as well. There's so many good books that she's written, and I would highly recommend checking Rebecca Roanhorse out if you like fantasy told from a different perspective. Check it out. All right, keeping up with my Barnes & Noble 2023 book reading challenge, I had to read a book about a journey of self-discovery. And so this week, I selected a book about creativity, written by one of the most influential creative people of the 20th and 21st century so far, and that is The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. Is this book the most revolutionary book about creativity? No. Is it easy to read? Yes. Is it insightful? Yes. I would highly recommend. If you just want to unlock creativity in your brain, Rick Rubin has some great ideas and disciplines to help you be more in touch with your creativity. Check it out. Hey everyone, this week for my Barnes & Noble 2023 reading challenge, I had to read a book that was published before I was born. And to quote Mona Lisa Saperstein, why didn't any of you jagweeds tell me to read Count of Monte Cristo sooner? For real, this book is excellent. I thoroughly enjoyed a story of revenge, a story about the dangers of greed, of pride, of humility, and finding a way to redemption. This book was excellent. It's not small, and that might be why I was so intimidated to jump in, but I loved reading this. It was a combination of print and audiobook from the library. But yeah, Count of Monte Cristo. What an excellent book. Enjoy. Hey everyone, this week for my Barnes & Noble 2023 reading challenge, the list said to read a Barnes & Noble exclusive edition book. And so I also wanted to double up and get a nominee for the Nebula Awards. And so I went with R.F. Kuang, Babel. And this is a book about colonialism, imperialism, word studies, magic, silver, capitalism, all kinds of things, all rolled up into one, and the human effect that all those systems have on people. And so if that sounds interesting to you, then check out Babel by R.F. Kuang. This week for my Barnes & Noble 2023 book reading challenge, the list said to read a picture book. And I don't have small children at home, so I don't have a lot of picture books anymore. So instead, I decided to read a graphic novel of a short book and one of my favorite books, the word-for-word Bible comic adaptation of the book of Jonah. I love Jonah. It is one of my favorite books in the whole Bible, and I would highly recommend this adaptation. It is brief. The art is truly beautiful. Here's the picture of Jonah being barfed up on the beach. It's excellent stuff. Excellent stuff. They also, this is one in a series. They're working on all kinds of other ones. I also have the Gospel of Matthew. Highly recommend it. Check it out. I got those at Barnes & Noble, so be sure to check it out. Enjoy. Hey everyone, a quick update for my 2023 Barnes & Noble reading challenge. This week's challenge was to read a book of the month selection. And so I went to their website, and they have many art in the archive there to choose from. And so I chose one that might interest me, and it's called Sleeper Agent by Anne Hagedorn. And so this is the true story of a Russian spy during World War II who gave nuclear secrets to the Russians, worked for the government. A fascinating story. Highly recommend. It is not a long book, and so if you're like, I don't know if I can get into historical fiction, this is great. If you like John le Carre, if you like Tom Clancy, if you like spy novels, you might really enjoy this. And the crazy thing is, it's true. Sleeper Agent. Check it out. Quick update on the Barnes & Noble 2023 reading challenge. This week's book was a book that made you cry, and I was gonna do a book that was recommended to make me cry, did not make me cry. So I was currently reading a different book, and it got me a little emotional, and that book is Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson, and this is the Kickstarter edition. And this book is a delightful journey where the princess goes to rescue the prince kind of story. And what made me emotional was the way that Tress impacted the lives of the people in her journey, and the influence and the relationships that were transformed as she cared for people. It was so good. It's just a delightful little book. Highly recommend it. And if you have the Kickstarter, it's a beautiful artifact. So check it out. This week for my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, I had to read a book about a difficult decision, and I asked my wife, what's a book that you would recommend? And she recommended The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. And this is a book about many difficult decisions. It follows the story of two French sisters during World War II, and one sister decides to resist, and the other sister has to make difficult decisions to survive. And it was a powerful book. It really went places I was not expecting. But yeah, I would recommend it. It was a good read. Thank you, my dear wife, for recommending The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. Hey everyone, this week for my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, I was tasked to read a piece of speculative fiction, some sci-fi, if you will. And so I was looking at the Nebula Award nominees, and I still had to read this book, The Mountain and the Sea by Ray Naylor. And this is a book about sentient octopodes and AI and androids and what is a person kind of thing, and how do societies develop. And it was an interesting book. It was interesting. It wasn't my favorite book I've read so far, but I think I can see why it was nominated for the Nebula Award, even if it didn't win. So, The Mountain and the Sea by Ray Naylor. Check it out. Hey everyone, this week for my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, it was a book that makes you laugh. And so I, this week, listened to the audiobook for Tom Papa's You're Doing Great and Other Reasons to Stay Alive. And Tom Papa is one of the best comedians. He's so funny and super relatable. And so I used the audiobook because he actually reads it. And so hearing a comedian read their own books is like a multi-hour long comedy special. I loved it. Highly recommend Tom Papa, You're Doing Great, and Other Reasons to Stay Alive. He has other books that are available as well. Check them out. Hey everyone, this week for my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, I had to read a cozy mystery, and I wasn't really sure what that meant. I don't read a lot of mystery novels, so I had to look it up, and then I looked up for a list because there was a lot that I was like, I don't think I would like that. But I found this cover, Death by Dumpling by Vivian Chen. I just loved it by the cover alone. I judged the book by the cover, and I was right. I really enjoyed this book, and it is the first in a series. It follows Lana Lee and her community, a Asian complex of restaurants and shops and all these different folks in the Cleveland area, and it was great. I enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to reading other installments in the series, and the best title is Hot and Sour Suspects. I'm looking forward to reading that someday. So check it out. Death by Dumpling by Vivian Chen. This week for my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, I was supposed to read a librarian favorite. So I reached out to my friend Rick, who is a librarian. I said, what's one of your favorite books? And he recommended The Three-Body Problem. And this is a speculative fiction work. It's kind of a first contact story, but it is based in Chinese culture, and so it really does feel like a totally different experience than any other first contact type book that I have read before, and it's what would happen if we made contact with another species and they were not super into the idea of us. So check out The Three-Body Problem. It's also a Hugo winner, and so it checks off another list for me as well. So thanks Rick. Check it out. Everybody, this week for my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, I am supposed to read a book about history, and I saw this book at Barnes & Noble, and I was like, oh, the ancient past of the previous century. I decided to read Chuck Klosterman's book, The 90s. It's a series of essays about different cultural phenomena that happened in the 90s, ranging from O.J. Simpson to the advent of the internet and its prominence in American culture. It was super interesting. I really enjoyed reading this. This is the first Klosterman book that I've ever read, and I would consider reading more in the future. I really enjoyed his writing style. So Chuck Klosterman, The 90s, for our ancient history. Check it out. This week for my Barnes& Noble book reading challenge, I was supposed to read a book that everyone is talking about. And in my world, in my circles, we recently we're grieving the loss of Tim Keller as he passed away a couple weeks ago. And so a lot of people were talking about Colin Hansen's Timothy Keller, his spiritual and intellectual formation. And so I chose to listen to this book. Part of the benefit of the audiobook is at the end, there are some of Keller's more famous sermons. And so being able to re-listen to those has been a great blessing as well. But learning about Keller and how he was academically formed and spiritually formed is a great resource for pastors in our current age as well, to seek the mentors of our mentors. So Timothy Keller by Colin Hansen, check it out. Hey everybody, this week for my Barnes & Noble book reading challenge, I was supposed to read a bookseller favorite. So I went down to Barnes & Noble and I asked a local bookseller, what's your favorite? And so I talked to Kat and her favorite book, and she said I should read Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere. This is a great book. It's kind of an urban fantasy about a man who finds a woman in distress and he tries to help her, but in doing so, he also finds his life completely falling apart. And there are things that he was holding on to tightly. And through the journey, he begins to reevaluate what's really important. I started with print, but I also checked out the audio version from the library because Neil Gaiman reads it, and he's an excellent reader, excellent narrator. So check it out, Neil Gaiman, Neverwhere. Hey everyone, this week for my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, I was supposed to read a book about somebody I don't know. And so I was walking around Barnes & Noble a few weeks ago, and I stumbled across this biography of Albert Einstein, and it is a graphic novel. And the art is excellent. I really didn't know anything about Albert Einstein outside of E=mc². And this kind of tells his story of his life and his relationships, and they were messy. There was drama, but also kind of how the development of his theories came about and how he was willing to contradict himself and correct himself over time and learn. And so it was really good. Viani and Dai created this, and I would recommend all of this. Also, Allison Acton on colors. Einstein, check it out. This week for my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, I was supposed to read a book based in India. And so I found this book at Barnes & Noble, and I just really love the cover. It's by Bernard Cornwell. It is called Sharpe's Tiger. This is the first book in the Sharpe series, following a character named Richard Sharpe, who's kind of a scumbag, but he's in the military, and we meet him here. He just wants to get away, but there's some personal transformation, some opportunity to become a hero, all that kind of stuff. It is based in India because it was during the colonial era. It was a fun read. I don't know if I'm going to keep reading the Sharpe series, but this was definitely an interesting place to jump in on the series. So yeah, Sharpe's Tiger. Check it out. Hey everybody, this week for my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, I was supposed to reread a book. And so I am designing a course for Northwest University about preaching. And so I reread The Homiletical Plot by Eugene Lowry. And this is a classic book looking at narrative theory and how plot lines help keep us engaged, and how to approach sermon writing as a narrative, and looking at the status quo, upsetting the status quo, reestablishing equilibrium, all those different pieces. And so this is a great book. If you are a preacher, I would highly recommend The Homiletical Plot. Check it out. Hey everyone, this week for my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, I was supposed to read a book from my TBR. And so I am reading through the Hugo nominees. And so next up on my TBR was The Kaiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi. And this is a standalone book so far it's a fun read. It takes place during 2020 as our main character, Jamie, loses their job and gets an opportunity to be a part of an interesting, mysterious organization. Kaiju are involved. Yeah. So if you liked Red Shirts or Old Man's War, if you just like John Scalzi, if you like burritos, he's got a lot to say about that on social media. But yeah, I enjoyed this book. I would recommend Red Shirts as a first go. Check it out. Hey everyone, this week for my Barnes & Noble Reading Challenge, it was a friend favorite recommendation. And so I went to Facebook and I asked for some recommendations. And my friend Caitlin said, you should read Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. And it's a big book, and it's one of those books that I pick up and I put down, pick up and I put down. And so finally I just said, all right, I'll listen to the audiobook. And if you like stories that span centuries with a central theme that connects them all with different characters in different times, not different timelines, then you might really enjoy this book. I enjoy those many times. Just be honest, I had a hard time getting into Cloud Cuckoo Land, but I can see why so many people really love it. And yeah, if you like those kinds of stories, check it out. Hey everyone, this week for my Barnes & Noble Reading Challenge, I listened to the audiobook Surrender by Bono. And I am a tremendous fan of U2. I love their music, and I loved hearing the stories behind some of the songs, but also just Bono's life. Being a fan of U2, knowing more about Bono and how the band came together, all those kinds of things, super interesting. The audiobook is great because Bono reads it. And so, yeah, so he does a great job as a reader of his own story. But yeah, Surrender by Bono from U2. It is very fun, very good. I cried a couple times, so check it out. This week for my Barnes & Noble Reading Challenge, I needed to complete a series. And so a couple months ago, I started working through the Border trilogy by Cormac McCarthy. And so this week I finished Cities of the Plain, which is the final book in that trilogy. And this is kind of a Western noir type story. It is intense. It is pretty violent. It deals with tragedy and grief and trying to figure out your place in the world. Yeah, I have a hard time reading Cormac McCarthy because he doesn't use all the punctuation I prefer. So I listened to the audiobook, and it was an excellent audiobook. Yeah, but with Cormac McCarthy passing away, I thought it was a good time to read some of his books. So yeah, finished the Border trilogy, Cities of the Plain. Check it out. Hey everyone, this week for my Barnes & Noble Reading Challenge, I read and listened to The Daughter of Dr. Moreau by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. And the challenge was to read a book by an author of color. And this is also a Hugo nominee for this year, so got 2 for 1 as I'm trying to read through all the Hugos, and I only have one left to read. But this is a retelling of the Island of Dr. Moreau, but really focusing on the daughter's relationship and then the head guard of the household, their relationship, and asks questions about like identity and humanity and what does it mean to be a person. And so it was a pretty good read. Yeah, I've read a couple from Sylvia Moreno Garcia, and she has some great work. And so go check it out. Hey everyone, this week for my Barnes & Noble Reading Challenge, I was supposed to read a book that is a social media favorite. And by the time I was putting this part of the list together, everybody was talking about Red Rising by Pierce Brown. The latest volume in this series has just recently been released, and so everybody was like, we gotta get our reread on. And so I thought I'd finally get into this first book that I'd had for some time. And there's a lot of things to enjoy about this book. It is a revenge story. It talks about class and social structures, and it's set in a sci-fi world where Earth has been the humans have been terraforming planets in the solar system, and the different caste systems are used to make those things happen. And so there's a lot to enjoy about this book, but I wasn't crazy about it. But I will keep reading to see what happens in the coming volumes. Red Rising. Check it out. Hey everyone, this week for my Barnes & Noble Reading Challenge, I was supposed to read a book with a second-person narrative, which means like you do this kind of talk. It's my understanding. So I looked up what are some popular books with second person narratives? And this book was on the list. This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El Mahtar and Max Gladstone. And this is a really great book. It is a story of two people, two time travelers who are on warring factions, writing letters back and forth to each other, trying to outsmart, outlast, trying to help their team win, but at the same time, building a relationship. It is an interesting read, and I would highly recommend it. I don't think it is very much a second-person narrative, but it's still very good. Check it out. Hey, everybody. This week for my Barnes & Noble Reading Challenge, I was supposed to read a book with an unlikely detective, and it so happens that one of the Hugo nominees for this week is also a detective-type story, and that is The Spare Man. This is the last Hugo nominee that I had to read this year. And this is kind of like a Murder on the Orient Express, but in space. It's a good book. It was fun. It was light. I enjoyed it. I really enjoy Mary Robinette Kowal. Her Lady Astronaut series is fantastic. And so this is another great book. Standalone so far. Check it out. Hey, everybody. This week for my Barnes & Noble Reading Challenge, I was supposed to read a book that intimidates me. And I have been wrestling with whether or not to read this book for years. And so I finally did it. This year, I read The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This book is a butt kicker. I read a lot of it in print, and I did have to listen to a lot of it in audiobook. And I got the audiobook from Apple Books, and it was great. It was excellent. Great performance. This book is about a family that is incredibly dysfunctional, and three brothers and a half-brother who all have a very complicated relationship with their father. It's about a murder. It's about justice. It's about faith and doubt. It is the full meal deal. Hey everyone, this week for my Barnes & Noble Reading Challenge, the category was a book that gives you hope. And so I went online and said, what are some books that give people hope? And one of the books that was recommended was Gilead by Marilynne Robinson. And this is a book about an older pastor in a small town in Iowa. And he's writing to his son as he's reflecting on his life. And so it is a type of journal that's intended to be read. And he talks about the struggle of ministry, the struggle of getting older, and relationships and change and small town. And I loved this book. These little flags here were things I was like, I want to remember that. And so, yeah, this book was excellent. Highly recommend Marilynne Robinson, Gilead. Check it out. Hey, everybody. This week for my Barnes & Noble Reading Challenge, the challenge was to read something outside of my comfort zone. And so I have been wanting to get more into philosophy, and so I thought I'd go old school, and I went with Plato, 5 Dialogues. And these are dialogues from Socrates, who was Plato's teacher, and it looks at the seasons leading up to Socrates' execution. And did I understand all of what was going on? No. Did I enjoy reading it? Yes. Was it out of my comfort zone? Also, yes. Do I feel smarter? TBD. But I read it, and it was short. And so if you're looking for an introduction to philosophy, Plato, 5 Dialogues. Check it out. This week for my Barnes & Noble Reading Challenge, I was supposed to read an anthology, which is a collection of shorter pieces. And so I chose to read The Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy, edited by Rebecca Roanhorse. And I've read some of Rebecca Roanhorse's texts, and they're pretty fun. I've enjoyed many of them. And this was about 20 different pieces, short stories that were a wide range. Some I really enjoyed, others were a little harder to get into. And that's kind of the beauty of an anthology. None of these stories require a ton of commitment from you, but you get to know some new voices, new writers. And so check it out, The Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy. Hey, everybody. This week for my Barnes & Noble Reading Challenge, I was supposed to read a book from an author I'd known nothing about. And so I went to my local Barnes & Noble in Alderwood, and I went to the blind date with the bookshelf, and I found this book by Sarah Pinborough, Behind Her Eyes. And the description was like, this book has a twist ending that's going to freak you out, basically. And this is a book about, it's a psychological thriller about betrayal and friendship. And the end really did surprise me. And thinking about it over the last couple of days, I think the author earned the ending and set it up pretty well. So Behind Her Eyes, Sarah Pinborough. Check it out. Hey everybody, this week for my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, I was supposed to read a book from my did not finish pile. And so I went to one of the Hugo winners that I had a hard time with first time I tried to read it, Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny. And this is a book that is about a future human civilization that found a way to transplant their brains and memories into other bodies. And so it creates this kind of reincarnation. And it builds a culture and a caste system and a religious system that is in line with some ideas from Hinduism. And so this book really I had a hard time with when I first read it, and partly because of the edition I found at a used bookstore. But listening to it was good. And so Roger Zelazny, Lord of Light, check it out. Hey everyone, this week for my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, I was supposed to read a book with a map in it. And so I went to my to-be-read pile, and I have been looking forward to reading The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch for quite some time. And it has a tiny little map in the early chapters here, just this little map right there. And so this is a story about, it's a heist story in a medieval type fantasy world, and there's all kinds of intrigue and betrayal and cunning and danger and all of those things that make for a fun heist story. It was a pretty good book. It was good enough that I went out and bought the next two in the series. So, I mean, that's got to tell you something. So, The Lies of Locke Lamora. Check it out. Hey everyone, this week for my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, I was supposed to read a National Book Award winner. So I went down to my local Barnes & Noble in Alderwood, and I saw this book, The Rabbit Hutch by Tess Gunty. And this is a great book, National Book Award winner. It's a story about a community in a fictional town in Indiana that's going through tremendous change and how that displaces people. But also it talks about grief, it talks about justice, it talks about love and identity. And this book, it took me places. It was better than I expected. I didn't know what to expect when I started reading this book. There are some things that may be difficult for folks who have some sensitivities around trauma. But this book it was good. The Rabbit Hutch by Tess Gunty. Check it out. Hey everybody, this week for my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, I was supposed to read a romance novel, and I have no interest in modern romance novels. And so I decided to go back to the classics, and I read Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. And this is a story about a mom and some daughters who the father died, and they didn't have an inheritance after the son got married and kicked them out of their house. And so they had to kind of figure out a new life for themselves. And this is in the wealthy in England society types. And the sisters are trying to figure out what are they going to do, how are they going to be okay. There's some relationship drama. There's a lot of just like, well, why don't you actually just talk and say what you mean? Wouldn't that be helpful? So it was a good book. It took me a while to understand what was going on, and so I read the Marvel Comics adaptation, and that was also very helpful. So yeah, Sense and Sensibility, check it out. Hey everyone, this week for my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, I was supposed to read a nonfiction book that I know about a topic that I know nothing about. And so I picked up a book years ago when I was in Victoria on vacation, and it's called A History of Canada in 10 Maps by Adam Schultz. I know nothing about Canada. I know nothing about Canadian history. And this book, I just thought it would be an interesting read someday, and I am so glad that I finally got around to reading it. Canada's crazy. And the age of exploration, from the Vikings to the settlers, there's so many amazing things and stories I would never have heard about if I had not read this book. And so, A History of Canada in 10 Maps. Check it out. Hey everyone, this week for my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, I was supposed to read a book set in the 1700s, and so I wanted to continue reading more classics, and so I picked up from my local Barnes & Noble James Fenimore Cooper's The Last of the Mohicans. Now, I had seen this movie when it first came out, and I had never read the book, and this book is really good, fast-paced, full of adventure. There are some things that may be problematic with the ways that Cooper talks about different native populations, but it is still a really enjoyable adventure story. And so if you're looking for something that's an adventure, that's a classic, check out Last of the Mohicans by James Fenimore Cooper. This week for my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, I had to read a book about boxing. And I discovered this graphic biography about the true story of Holocaust survivor Harry Haft. And this book, is a black and white graphic novel style, telling the story of Harry Haft and his experiences in World War II prison camps as a Jewish Polish man, and how he had to survive and became a boxer and moved to America. It's a really gripping story, and it was powerful, emotional, and well drawn. And I would highly recommend a story that I've never heard before, and it was a powerful story. Check it out. Hey everybody, this week for my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, I was supposed to read a book that scares the pants off of me, and so this week I read The Shining by Stephen King. And this is the story about a family. The father of this family becomes the winter caretaker of a hotel in Colorado that's in a remote, mountainous location. And it's a hotel with some mystery and some shady doings in the past. It's a story of dealing with those things. It's a story of Jack and his sobriety struggles. And it's a story of their son Danny and finding out that Danny is more than he appears to be. And so this was a well-written book. It's intense. There's definitely things that made it super creepy. So it met the qualification. So yeah, The Shining by Stephen King. Check it out. Hey everybody, Merry Christmas. This week for my Barnes & Noble reading challenge, I was supposed to read a book with the word adventure in the title. And so I grabbed one from my long TBR called The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay by Michael Chabon. And this is about two Jewish cousins who find themselves in the crazy world of comic book production and creation before World War II, during World War II, and after World War II. It captures their life, their adventure, their struggles, their hardships, their joys, their loves, and all the while dealing with the culture around comic books in the golden age. And so this was a really a powerful book. So yeah, The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. Check it out. Hey everybody, this week for my last Barnes & Noble reading challenge for 2023, it was a book that I couldn't wait to read. And so this week I read Misfit by Gary Gulman. Gary Gulman is one of my favorite comedians. He's just a genius. He loves words, and the way he works with words in his comedy is fantastic. And in this, his memoir of growing up as an awkward kid in the 80s, it is a powerful story of feeling uncomfortable, feeling like you don't have a place, trying to find who you are. And I related to it very much. And Gulman does a great job of taking those feelings of being an awkward kid and all the way through elementary school and high school and trying to figure your place out. And there's hope to it to say, hey, I made it. You can make it too. The last chapter is so good, so powerful. Gary Gulman, Misfit. Check it out.